A tight deadline, a dangerous crack, a moral dilemma. What will be your next move? Today, I intend to discuss a case study from 2021. And this case study is quite interesting because on one side, you have issue of structural safety. On the other side, we have the issue of political pressure. Now, the larger question is, will you compromise with structural safety due to political pressure? Let's get into the case. An elevated corridor is being constructed to reduce traffic congestion in the capital of a particular state. You have been selected as a project manager. Remember, you are involved in the case directly. The deadline is to complete the project is in the next 2 years. And since the project is to be inaugurated by the CM, Chief Minister, before the elections are announced, there a lot of politics is riding on this project. While carrying out the surprise inspection by inspecting team, a minor crack was noticed in one of the piers of the elevated corridor, possibly due to poor material used. You immediately inform the chief engineer and stop further work. It was assessed by you that minimum 3 piers of the elevated corridor have to be demolished and reconstructed. But this process will delay the project minimum by 4 to 6 months. But the chief engineer overruled the observation of inspecting team. He ordered you to overlook the observation of inspecting team and continue working. The chief engineer further informed you that the minister does not want any delay. And further, he tells you that the contractor for this whole project happens to be a far relative of the minister and he wants him to finish the project. Besides all this, the chief engineer now has a surprise for you. The chief engineer says he gave you a hint that your further promotion as additional chief engineer is under consideration with the ministry. However, you strongly felt that a minor crack in the pier of the elevated corridor will adversely affect the health and life of the bridge, and therefore it will be very dangerous not to repair the elevated corridor. Now, keeping the above case in mind, you are expected to answer the following questions. And the questions are: under the given conditions, what are the options available to you as a project manager? The next question is, what are the ethical dilemmas being faced by the project manager? The next one, what are the professional challenges likely to be faced by the project manager and his response to overcome such challenges? And the last one, what can be the consequences of overlooking the observation raised by the inspecting team? Now let's come down to the first question. It's a very interestingly framed question. The question is, under the given conditions, what are the options available to you? There are two key phrases here: given conditions. So you don't have to identify options here. You have to identify options keeping the conditions in mind. Remember this, if you're not writing the conditions and you're straight away getting into options, that means your answer is incomplete. So you first have to discuss the conditions, then keeping the conditions in mind, you give me options. If you read the case study carefully, you can see the following conditions. First condition, the inspection team flags the construction quality. Second, you take it to your chief engineer and chief engineer orders you to ignore the inspection team's observation. Second condition. Third condition, there are a lot of political pressure here to complete the project because the CM has to inaugurate. Third condition. So along with safety, a big condition comes in, that is political pressure. Fourth condition, very interesting one, your future promotion is also at stake. So whatever options you develop has to keep these four conditions in mind. Keeping all these conditions in mind, there's one thing which is very obvious here is you can comply with the instructions. This is called compliance approach. Your first option can be complying with your chief engineer's instructions. In government engineering departments, especially like public works department or CPWD, it's all very hierarchically structured. In a hierarchically structured organization, one is expected to comply with superior's orders. Now let's take this case. You are an engineer and you are reporting to your chief engineer. So it's expected of you to comply to chief engineer's order. Now look at the issue here. There was an inspecting team. They flagged the construction quality. The issue came up to you. You raised it. You raised it above your level. You went to the chief engineer. Chief engineer looked at the whole thing and chief engineer gives you direct orders saying that to ignore the inspection team's reports, and you're directly ordered to do your work. So what are you doing here is you're complying with your chief engineer's instruction, because that's what you are supposed to do, because you are in the bottom of the hierarchy. And by doing this, yes, this is kind of compromises with the safety of the structure, but by doing this, you are being administratively correct. The larger question is something wrong is about to happen. Safety of a structure is being compromised. So, as a professional engineer, you're left with one option. And that option is called you can raise the issue to your higher authorities, bring it to their notice. Fine, your chief engineer is not taking action, the others will, because the integrity of the structure has been compromised. So, the second option here is bring it to notice of higher authorities or at the same time to regulatory bodies. By doing this, you are ensuring your professional ethics is intact, one, and two, it shows that you're not giving importance to political pressure. You are more focused on the engineering side of your profession. So that's a second option. And I'm sure some of you may be wondering, by taking the issue to the higher ups, you're being disobedient. Yes, you're being disobedient, but you're being responsible also. You're being a responsible engineer also. So this is where there's a concept called responsible disobedience comes in. Responsible disobedience is a concept within business and professional ethics that refers to the deliberate act of defying orders. Listen to this carefully. Deliberate act of defying orders, policies, or norms within an organization when they conflict with ethical principles, legal standards, or the greater good. This type of disobedience is not simply about resistance or rebellion. Rather, it's characterized by a deep sense of moral responsibility and a commitment to ethical conduct. It's connected to big virtues also, and these virtues are called personal integrity and moral courage. Do you think there's a third option here? Just think about it. I'll give you 2 seconds. Yes, of course, there's a third approach. And the third approach is a mix of professionalism and pragmatism. And that approach is about insisting on uh, repairing the cracks and then moving forward with the project. This is a very pragmatic approach and professional as well. Pragmatic, why? Because you're not taking on the chief engineer directly by reporting to higher authorities. At the same time, you're not being compliant to his orders which compromise with the safety of the structure. What you're doing here is it's a kind of a middle ground approach. What you're doing here is you're trying to speak, you're trying to negotiate with the chief engineer about repairing the structure. It's a hard thing to do, it's a tough call, but the point is you have to take that call. You have to try to persuade, because it's not about chief engineer, it's also about your professionalism is also at stake, because you're part of the same project. If something goes wrong along the chief engineer, you'll also pay a price. So that's why not talk to him? Why not instill some pragmatic thinking into your chief engineer's mind? As a professional engineer, you can explore one more option, and the option happens to be documenting everything, documenting the inspection committee's report, observations, documenting your chief engineer's order, and at the same time, registering a protest with your chief engineer that, sir, I am unhappy following your instructions, but as a respect for hierarchy, I will continue doing my work. This way, what happens? You're documenting everything. This way, in future, if you're called for any accountability inquiry, you have all the documents with you. At the same time, you're also protesting against something wrong that's happening within the department. And the wrong happens to be compromise of structural integrity. Now that we explored the options, now let's come to the second question or the next question. And the next question is about what are the ethical dilemmas which are there in this case. Let's explore the ethical dilemmas which are there in the case. I will not explain what ethical dilemmas are, because this is something I covered in one of my earlier episodes. Do go and check that video out also. Let's explore the ethical dilemmas. The first big ethical dilemma that the project manager faces is safety versus political expediency. Now, I'm a professional engineer. Now, as a professional engineer, should I be more worried about the safety and integrity of the elevated corridor, or should I be worried about the political timelines? What should I be worried about? Second big ethical dilemma that you have is you have to make a choice between your professional integrity and job security. Now, what is hanging in balance here is your professional integrity, on the other side, your job security. Because the chief engineer also informs you that you're considered for a promotion, you're considered for a post of additional engineer. So, you comply with your chief engineer's instructions, there's every possibility that you grow in your career. Your job is more secure. If you go with your professional integrity, you may somewhere down the line compromise your relationship with your chief engineer. There's every possibility that you may pay the price. You may end up paying the price by not getting promoted. The next big dilemma I can think of, if I'm a project manager, is very simple. It's about, should I be obedient to authority? On the other side, should I fulfill my ethical responsibility? Now, if you look at the whole case, as an engineer, as a project engineer, I was aware of the inspection committee's report. I was aware of the compromise that's happening in terms of structural integrity. So don't you think it's my ethical responsibility to highlight that, to ensure that we don't commit such professional mistakes? Ethical responsibility. On the other side, the big challenge is, since I'm working in a hierarchy bound organization, obedience to authority also matters. The concept behind the dilemma, which I spoke about right now, obedience to authority versus ethical responsibility, is something I borrowed from Kidder's book. R.M. Kidder wrote a very influential book, How Good People Make Tough Choices, where he talks about a dilemma called dilemma between truth versus loyalty. Truth for most people is conformity with facts or reality. Loyalty involves allegiance to a person, corporation, or body of people, a government or set of ideas to which one owes loyalty. The dilemma here is, it is right to stand on truth, it's right to be loyal. The next dilemma I can think of is a clash between transparency and complicity. Now, should I be transparent here? Since I'm aware of all the details, since I'm aware what's happening on the project, should I be transparent and report it to higher authorities, or should I comply with my boss's directive, chief engineer's directive? The last dilemma I can think of is a very interesting one. The project engineer is caught between two interests: personal interest and public interest. Ensuring that structural integrity of the elevated corridor is maintained is called working in public interest. If the engineer starts working to meet political deadline, he is working in the private interest of the contractor and the politicians. An exam advice for all of you. Since we are discussing how to write answers, an exam advice, I've discussed 5 dilemmas. It is not necessary for you in the exam to write all the 5. You can just mention 3, explain them very well. That's good enough. Since it's a learning activity, that's why I'm trying to cover as many dilemmas as possible. The next question is a very interesting one, and the question reads, what are the professional challenges likely to be faced by the project manager and his response to overcome such challenges? The question is interesting. Why? Because there are 2 parts of the question, not one, there are 2 parts of the question. The first part are the challenges. The second part is about responses. So when you're writing an answer for this question, think about this. You first have to mention the challenges, then you have to talk about how the project manager will be responding to the challenge. The first challenge is the challenge of meeting the deadlines, because there's a lot of political pressure on this project. So the project is functioning at a very tight deadline. Remember, the CM has to inaugurate this. There's elections happening, the CM has to inaugurate it. So there was a lot of pressure. To overcome this challenge of time pressure, what the project manager can do is, firstly, he can do a risk assessment of ignoring the cracks. What are the risks associated? Then he can try to persuade the chief engineer to work on a realistic timeline. The second big challenge the project manager has is to uphold his professional integrity under severe pressure from his superiors. Now, please remember, his chief engineer has told him to ignore the report of the inspection team. And by ignoring it, they're compromising with structural safety. The only way you can meet this challenge is to have courage, determination. Since you're under tremendous pressure to cut corners, to compromise with the professional integrity, the only way to do it is display moral courage, stand up, be determined to do the right thing. And while doing the right thing, record everything, document everything. The next big challenge I can think of that the project manager has is how will he handle the hierarchical pressure? He was under immense hierarchical pressure to ignore the inspection committee report. The only way the project manager can navigate this challenge is to convey the seriousness of the issue to the chief engineer and to other stakeholders. The next challenge is a tightrope walk. And this challenge is about balancing political expediency and public safety. The only way to balance the public safety and political expediency concerns is having a phased approach. When I say phased approach, immediately let's address the concern of the crack. Let's put all resources and effort to repair the crack. Then, in a very phased manner, shift to other parts of the project. This way, you'll be able to manage the structural integrity, manage to keep the structural integrity also intact, and meet the deadlines also. The last big challenge I can think of is potential career implications. If he complies, his career takes off. If he doesn't comply, it will have repercussions. The only way to meet this challenge is to combine two qualities, the qualities of professional competence and ethical leadership. If the manager completes the whole project on time, that shows professional competence. And at the same time, without compromising with the safety of the structure, that shows ethical leadership skills also. The last question of the case study has a very different flavor altogether. And this question focuses on what can be the consequences of overlooking the recommendations of the inspection committee. The first big consequence I can think of is structural failure and public safety risk. Because there are 3 piers which have developed cracks. So there's every possibility that the structure may collapse. So first big consequence can be structural collapse. And the moment structure collapses, it's a huge risk for public. And public safety is at risk. So that's the first consequence I can think of. And talk about consequences. If you read newspapers, recently there's a lot of news about bridge collapses in Bihar. So as a professional engineer and a project manager, I'm aware of the risks. Second big consequence happens to be legal and regulatory repercussions. In case if the structure fails, in case if the structure develops further cracks, there'll be a lot of legal repercussions. There'll be a lot of regulatory issues. Who knows, you as a project manager may be sanctioned for something. Who knows, you may be suspended. Who knows, there'll be fine imposed. Who knows, your career as a professional is over after this. The next consequence of ignoring the report I can think of is financial implications. In case after the project is completed and the structure develops further cracks, repairing it, mending it, all that will involve huge financial implications, all that will involve huge financial outlays. And God forbid, unfortunately, if the structure collapses, people lose lives, it can become a costly affair. Lastly, the biggest consequence is your professional integrity. If you ignore the report and you don't do anything about the report, that means you are compromising with your professional integrity itself. As a project manager, it's your responsibility, it's your duty to ensure that the structure is strong enough. It's to ensure that the structure meets all safety standards. In short, ignoring the report of the inspection committee can be disastrous. And personally speaking, I don't think any engineer or any chief engineer or any professional should ignore such warnings. Because everything starts with small cracks, ends up with great structural collapse. If you can think of any issues, if you can think of any better options, or if you can think of any challenges, do share your thoughts in the comment section. So long, happy learning.